Hello, I'm Pastor Hilly. A comment I get from people often is, this year I'm going to read the Bible from cover to cover. And upon hearing this, I always respond the same way. Why? Not why are you going to read the Bible? I recommend reading and studying it, but why from cover to cover? And you may be thinking to yourself, well, duh, that's the way it's written. To which I'd like to interject that, well, it's the way it's arranged. But written and arranged are different things. Let me take a step back. The Bible, as we understand it, is a collection of 66 books. The Old Testament has 39, and the New Testament has 27 books. And together, we call the codex of these 66 books the Bible. Included within those 66 books are poems, prayers, songs, histories, mythologies, prophecies, personal correspondence, memoirs, and parables, just to name a few of the styles of literature that also span centuries. The Old Testament is obviously older than the New Testament, much of the Old Testament being assembled centuries before the birth of Jesus. However, the modern concept of the Christian Bible was solidified centuries after Jesus. So there's some time and arrangement that happens there. Generally speaking, the Old Testament is arranged by category: the law, histories, poetry, and prophecy, with those prophetic writings being arranged in the order of thickest to thinnest, from Isaiah to Malachi. Likewise, the New Testament is arranged in categories as well, those being the life of Jesus, the history of the church, Paul's letters to churches, Paul's letters to individuals, and then letters by others. These letters are also arranged from thickest to thinnest, from Romans to Jude, with Revelation at the end, but that's an apocalyptic text, not a letter. So here comes my issue. This arrangement is based on category and density, and not on chronology or date created, and that should be considered when reading the Bible from cover to cover. In addition, maybe we should consider that reading those 66 books we call the Bible in other orders might also be insightful. Or a step further, maybe there are different orders of the text that could bring us to different understandings. Let's consider Star Wars. Follow me here. New Hope, the first movie released, which was the fourth episode sequentially, was released in 1977. The Empire Strikes Back, the second movie released in the fifth episode in the sequence, was released in 1980. And Return of the Jedi, which was the third movie but the sixth episode, was released in 1983. 16 years later, we got The Phantom Menace, which was the fourth movie released, yet the first episode sequentially, and it came out in 1999. Simply put, the 10 movies that make up the franchise, not counting all the shows and other spin-offs, cover 43 years and were not released chronologically. To help me better understand this, I called an expert, my longtime friend and mentor, Pastor Will Rose, who, despite having horrible taste in basketball teams, does have an encyclopedic knowledge of Star Wars. My question to him was simple. If someone with no knowledge of the franchise wanted to watch the movies, what order would you recommend them? Pastor Rose's recommendation was to start with 1977's A New Hope, since it was the first to begin with. Then, 1980's The Empire Strikes Back. As he said, it's the big sequel, and in his opinion, the best of all the movies. After that, 1999's Episode 1, since once we get the big reveal of who Vader really is, then people can go down the road of learning his story and turn to the dark side. I'll include Pastor Rose's lineup in the description below. But there are 2 points I'd like to make here. One is that it's a great idea to get people hooked on the OG story before making them sit through Jar Jar Binks. Because if Episode 1 had actually come out first, I'm not sure we'd have received 10 movies over 43 years. That brings me to my second point, which is far more important. The order that we are exposed to things impacts how we understand and experience them. Do we watch Star Wars in order of release date, episode sequence, recommendation of a friend, or simply the order that we find them on Disney+? No matter which option you choose, it will mold your experience with the franchise. Considering all this, let's go back to the Bible. For Christians reading the Scripture, the Old Testament is without a doubt foundational. It's why Matthew and Luke give us lineages of Jesus that connect to the Davidic tradition, and John paraphrases Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 in his opening verse. But not everybody is going to make it through the 39 books of the Old Testament the first time. So if we only consider the New Testament, how should we approach it? Matthew is the first of the four Gospels in order because at the time of its canonization, it was thought to be the oldest of the four. Though since the 19th century it has been agreed upon that Mark is the oldest Gospel and was a source for both Matthew and Luke. The Acts of the Apostles, which many simply call Acts, was written by the author of Luke. So why not read the first 5 books in the sequence Mark, Matthew, John, Luke, Acts? Or Mark, Matthew, Luke, Acts, and then John. You'll notice in both of these, I recommend starting with Mark. I do this because if you would remove all of the verse numbers and chapter numbers and subtitles within the text, none of which were there in the original Greek, and print it like a mass trade paperback, like a Nicholas Sparks or a Stephen King novel, the whole Gospel of Mark would be about 19 to 20 pages, which is manageable for the entire life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Beyond that, on YouTube, you can find videos of people reciting the entire Gospel of Mark, and it takes approximately the same amount of time as one of the Star Wars episodes, if not less. I'll include a link to one of these videos in the description below. What about the epistles? Consider this. Consider the difference it might make if we take the epistles ascribed to Paul and rearrange them so that they are in chronological order of Paul's ministry and not simply longest to shortest. And another thing, what do we do with our favorite passages as an entry point when exposing others to Scripture? When engaging with youth groups for the first time, I almost always go back to the Old Testament. Specifically, the stories of Elisha and the she-bears in 2 Kings, when 2 she-bears maul 40 children for jeering at the prophet. I also like to tell the great story from Judges of when God sends Ehud to murder Elgon, the fat king, and he does so on the toilet. Now you may say, but it says throne. Think about it again. It's a toilet. Just saying. These are stories that we never get to hear on a Sunday morning, but they are definitely exciting and entertaining for middle schoolers. The reality of Scripture is that it is wonderfully complex, and through that offers us a plethora of ways to engage with it, understand it, and explore it. To borrow from Peter Enns, if there is one thing that we can say about the Bible, it is that it is ancient, it is ambiguous, and it is diverse. And I agree with him that all 3 of these adjectives are powerful strengths. So before you sit down to read the Bible cover to cover, like approaching anything, try asking someone for their opinion. Ask what they like most. Ask where they would recommend starting. Just don't ask Pastor Rose about basketball.